Tomorrow is roster cutdown day in the National Football League, which means that quite a few receivers will be hitting the waiver wire for the Pittsburgh Steelers to be considering. So the Steelers, I think, are probably in the market to add a wide receiver before the start of the 2025 NFL season. So today on the show, we're going to be going over 15 options, 5 trade targets, 5 current free agency options, and then 5 waiver wire targets for Omar Khan to pursue here in the coming days as they look to round out their wide receiver room heading into this year. Before we get into today's edition of Steelers Talk, make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already for breaking news coverage. If the Steelers make a move today, if they trade Skylar Thompson, if they trade Beanie Bishop Jr., if they make a signing of some sort, if they make a trade of some sort, we will have a video for you guys on this channel as soon as we can put it up. So make sure you click that subscribe button to never miss a big move that Omar Khan makes any day of the year. All right, so now let's get into the 3 categories that we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to have 5 wide receivers in each of these categories on today's video, 5 trade targets, 5 free agency targets, and 5 waiver wire targets to keep your eye on here as waiver wire cuts and roster cuts kind of go through here over the next 48 hours or so. So first up here, let's start with the trade targets because these are some of the bigger names. These are more of the true wide receiver 2 types that if the Steelers want to add somebody to put ahead of Calvin Austin III and Roman Wilson in the wide receiver depth chart, they can go out and get these players. The one that's not impossible, in my opinion, is the cheetah Tyreek Hill. All right, I do think that he is a dark horse, but he would be absolutely electric as pretty much a second number 1 receiver inside the Steelers wide receiver room next to DK Metcalf, who's more of that bigger type of receiver, but Tyreek Hill is also a deep threat type, really great yak threat, obviously in a smaller package. You could package, maybe Calvin Austin III or Roman Wilson in a trade for Tyreek Hill, and I think that, you pair Tyreek Hill up with DK Metcalf, that is certainly something that the Pittsburgh Steelers could do to really create one of the better wide receiver duos in the National Football League. The Steelers have also done business with the Dolphins this offseason, so it's certainly feasible where if the Dolphins want to get rid of Tyreek Hill and they don't want to pay that massive roster bonus that they owe him at the end of this month, it's certainly a possibility where if the Steelers, have a good enough offer here, they could come to the table, but I wouldn't say it's likely. Then we get to Jauan Jennings, who I do think would be a really good number 2 wide receiver option for the Pittsburgh Steelers if they could land him. According to Tim Kawakami from the San Francisco Standard, things are still far apart between Jennings and the 49ers organization. This is what he had to say over the weekend. Quote, "There is growing frustration on both sides as Jennings continues to miss practice with a calf injury, a quote-unquote calf injury, and the 49ers management continues to show little interest in restructuring his contract and giving him a big pay raise for the second time in a little over a year." So listen, guys, it seems like Jennings is kind of doing like a mini hold-in sort of deal where he's saying he's got a little bit of a calf issue so that he doesn't have to practice or anything like that. It appears that he does want to stay in San Francisco, and it appears like the 49ers want him on their team, but Jennings appears to be unwilling to play on his current deal that he got last offseason and wants to get a pay raise after pretty much having a top 20 season statistically for a wide receiver in the National Football League last year. And in terms of his fit with the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think the Steelers can absolutely pay him the money that he wants. He's one of the best, if not the best, run-blocking wide receiver in the National Football League. He's a great, savvy route runner. He's got phenomenal hands and can make tough catches in traffic. I just think that he's a perfect wide receiver, too, for this football team. And if the Steelers have any shot of making a trade for him, I would absolutely be in on that. Another veteran wide receiver that I would be in on is Adam Thielen. The Steelers were very interested in Thielen at the trade deadline last year. Now, Carolina apparently wanted an early day 3 or late day 2 draft pick for Thielen. I kind of agree with the Steelers' process to not give that up because I think that's a little bit pricey for somebody that might be entering his final NFL season. But Thielen is still very good. He still has very good hands. He can play, he's probably best in the slot, but he can play outside. He's played in systems that have asked him to run block quite a bit, and he might be looking for a team that is closer to a championship championship than the Carolina Panthers are. He's also good friends with Aaron Rodgers. There's a lot of things that make sense when it comes to Adam Thielen. And then theoretically, he's an older wide receiver. Carolina is in a phase of their organization where they got a lot of young wide receiver talent that they might want to keep on the roster. So maybe you could get him for a 5th or 6th round pick is probably what the price tag would be on him. So in terms of guys like Tyreek Hill, Jauan Jennings, guys that might be a little bit more expensive on the trade market, Thielen might make a little bit more sense as a 1-year rental. Then Alec Pierce is another name that has been thrown out there. Andrew Filipponi, for whatever Pony's word is worth, says that he is on the trade block. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, because if they trade Pierce there in Indianapolis and one of their receivers get hurt, then they have a major depth issue there at wide receiver. But Pierce is a legitimate deep threat with them starting Daniel Jones, who might be the most conservative starting quarterback in the NFL. Not sure if Pierce is really going to thrive there in Indianapolis this season. I think he would do a lot better here in Pittsburgh with Aaron Rodgers throwing him the football. Plus, he's a big body. He can run block theoretically. I think he'd be a good fit here in Pittsburgh. But I do think that the price tag might be a little bit higher on him because he is a younger player, along with the fact that I'm not convinced the Colts are actually shopping him at this point, but I would be in if they are. Then we get to Romeo Doubs. Now, it appears Matt LaFleur over the weekend said that he's not going anywhere, but, that doesn't mean that he might not be open to a potential trade if the price is right. I don't think they're going to cut Romeo Doubs, but I do think that if the Steelers offered up a high enough price tag, I do think Green Bay may take a look at that because they do have a pretty full wide receiver room at this point. Now, Doubs is not a perfect wide receiver, guys, especially with his hands. He's had drop issues throughout camp this year. He's had a drop issue throughout his time in Green Bay. So if you don't like drops, Romeo Doubs probably isn't for you, but I do think he'd be a good fit for what the Steelers are looking in their number 2 wide receiver. He's got good size. He can run block. He's a really good route runner. He's got some established chemistry with Aaron Rodgers. They played together in 2022. So, there's certain things that make him a good fit here in Pittsburgh. I wouldn't pay too much for him because he does have a slight concussion concern. He had multiple concussions last year, has to wear a Guardian cap in game as well because of that. And he also has that drop issue. So not sure if I'd pay too much for him, but if you could get him for a 6th or 7th round pick, I would certainly be in on Romeo Doubs. But the thing about wide receiver trade targets, guys, and the 5 guys that I just talked about, is that they would all be coming in to essentially play the wide receiver 2 role because the Steelers would be giving up draft capital to bring him in. And if you're going to be giving up draft capital to bring in a player, you're probably going to want to give them, a starter workload, right? So what you need to know about the Steelers wide receiver situation, though, guys, is that I would be down for getting a legit wide receiver 2, and I think a lot of people in this fan base would be as well. But I think Pittsburgh is probably more interested in adding a nice wide receiver depth piece at the X wide receiver spot in case DK Metcalf gets injured, as opposed to adding another starter and essentially benching either Roman Wilson or Calvin Austin III. You guys can take a look at the current rotation here. DK Metcalf obviously is your every down number 1 wide receiver, but they like Roman Wilson as a number 2. He run blocks. He's somebody that is very fast and has great acceleration, and he can really get open on those runaway routes, those crossing routes that we see Arthur Smith love to run here in Pittsburgh. And Calvin Austin III can't run block, but he's an excellent, in my opinion, route runner, and he's a great dynamic threat that can win to all 3 levels of the field as a pass-catching threat on those pass-heavy downs. So the Steelers seem to really like their starting trio there at DK Metcalf, Roman Wilson, and Calvin Austin III. And agree with it or not, guys, I do think the Steelers view Roman Wilson as a legitimate number 2 receiver in this offense, especially because they want to play so much 13 personnel with 3 tight ends on the field, where you got Jonnu Smith, Pat Freiermuth, and Darnell Washington all on the field at the same time. In those formations, guys, you only have 1 receiver on the field, and that's the guy you're paying over $30 million per season, DK Metcalf. So a guy like Roman Wilson, someone you're not paying all that much, but fits the role of this wide receiver 2 in this Arthur Smith offense, somebody that run blocks, somebody that is very fast and can, separate down the field, all those different things. I think, agree with it or not, Pittsburgh does like Roman Wilson as a number 2 wide receiver heading into this season. So coming up here on on Steelers Talk, we'll talk about some free agency and waiver wire wide receiver targets. And most of these guys that I'm going to be talking about in the second half of today's show are more wide receiver 4 depth pieces behind Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin III. Might be a little bit more realistic options here. But before we get into the rest of today's video, I want to give you guys a great opportunity here. We're less than 2 weeks away from the start of the Steelers 2025 NFL regular season. So if you guys want to get an Aaron Rodgers Steelers jersey in your closet before the season opener versus the New York Jets, you guys can go to our link right now at chatsports.com/AR8 and get that done right now. Part of the proceeds goes to us here at Steelers Talk to help us pay for rent, help us keep the lights on, do all the things that we need to do here to keep this content free for you guys. So if you guys want to go chatsports.com/AR8 and make a purchase, you guys can get an Aaron Rodgers Steelers jersey today, and you can help out the channel. We greatly appreciate your support. Again, you can find that link in the comments and description of today's show, chatsports.com/AR8. So before we get into the free agency and the waiver wire additions, I want to acknowledge here the biggest weakness with the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver room is what happens if DK Metcalf gets hurt, right? Because even though the Steelers, I think, do feel like Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin III fit inside their respective roles inside the Steelers offense, if DK Metcalf gets hurt, there's not really somebody that you trust to go in there and play the X wide receiver position. Robert Woods appears to be officially cooked. A lot of people don't expect him to make the team this year. Brandon Johnson is dealing with a foot injury, and I'm not sure if he's got necessarily the size to make up for DK Metcalf's role if he goes down with an injury. So Pittsburgh's focus here, guys, might be to find a cheap wide receiver in the free agency or on the waiver wire that can play X if DK Metcalf gets hurt, God forbid, right? Because we saw last year what happened when George Pickens, this team's X wide receiver, got injured and they didn't have anybody on the roster that could replace his role at that spot. I don't think Pittsburgh wants to repeat that same mistake, or at least I hope they don't want to repeat that same mistake. And there are some legitimate options out there that can be good wide receiver 4s and backup X wide receivers. We'll start here with the free agency list with Gabe Davis, who this team has brought in for 2 separate free agency visits. Now, Gabe's biggest thing is injuries, but we'll talk about that here in just a second. But I think that Davis is a perfect fit for what Pittsburgh's looking for, is that wide receiver 4 kind of guy, somebody with a lot of experience, somebody that's played really well in big games, and somebody that can play X wide receiver if DK Metcalf goes down, all right? Like Gabe Davis and DK Metcalf, pretty similar skill sets, limited route trees, really good run blockers, really big bodies, red zone threats, all those things. So if DK Metcalf does go down, you can put Gabe Davis in there. And then also if you do bring him in, you can put him in on short yardage situations, goal line situations, stuff where you want an even better run blocker than Roman Wilson as your number 2 receiver out there. I think that Davis could rotate in even if DK is not injured. So we'll see if Davis ends up signing with the Steelers. Obviously, the Steelers feel like he's a fit. I think it just comes down to how healthy is his knee, right? Because according to some reporting, Davis's first visit to Pittsburgh, his knee was not in a good place. And the reality of the situation here, guys, is that he has had 6 separate free agency visits this offseason, 2 of them with Pittsburgh, and he is still not signed to an NFL team. He has had visits with the Bills, the Steelers, the Giants, the Saints, and the 49ers, and all 5 of those teams, at least to this point, have not signed Davis. So the chances of his knee just not being in a good enough spot heading into the year is absolutely possible. But Davis is cheap. He would just cost the veteran minimum. And if he's healthy enough, I think he'd be a good fit for what the Steelers are wanting at this position. Then we get to Odell Beckham Jr. And, OBJ, didn't get used a whole lot there in Miami. The Dolphins play a lot of 21 personnel, which is 2 running back sets. And in those formations, you only have 2 wide receivers on the field. Those 2 receivers were Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So Odell just didn't get on the field a whole lot last year. Now, I'm not saying when he was on the field he was all that great, but, you look at Odell, I think as a wide receiver 4, he's played X, he's played Z. You can play him in the slot if you need to. He's a serviceable run blocker as well. He likes to run block, and I think you could do worse than OBJ. He's close friends with Aaron Rodgers as well, so he has a little bit of established chemistry with A-Rod. So if DK Metcalf does go down with an injury, you could do worse than Odell Beckham Jr. I would rather have a healthy Gabe Davis than OBJ. But if they end up signing Odell for the vet minimum, I wouldn't necessarily hate it. But my biggest question when it comes to OBJ is he okay being a wide receiver 4? Because that's what he would be here in Pittsburgh. I do not think he would be coming in here right away and he would be the wide receiver 2 in front of Roman Wilson. We already talked about how I think the Steelers really like Roman's skill set heading into this season. They feel like he can be a mainstay in this offense for many years to come. And OBJ, of course, is somebody that's a former superstar. He's used to being a starter. I'm sure he didn't love being benched essentially last year in Miami. So we'll see where he is heading into the year. Then Amari Cooper, I had included Amari, but I think at this point if the Steelers wanted him and they were offering him a starting role on the offense, Amari probably would have already signed with the team. The two big issues with Amari Cooper, number one, he has a really bad reputation as a run blocker. So in terms of making him this team's wide receiver 2, I'm not sure Arthur Smith would be too keen on that. Cooper's just not somebody that loves to run block, and he has that reputation around the league, even though he's a bigger guy. And then the second thing is I think Cooper wants to be either a number 1 or number 2 wide receiver for a team that he signs with, and I don't think he's going to accept a wide receiver 4 role, which is kind of what the Steelers are looking for at this point. So even though Amari Cooper is still out there, still a possibility, not sure he's the best fit for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Then you get to Nelson Agholor, another guy that has been a wide receiver 4 type for the Baltimore Ravens the last few years. And, when called upon, he's still somebody that's got, long limbs. He's somebody that can still run a little bit. He doesn't have the best hands in the world, but, as a wide receiver 4, you could do a lot worse than Nelson Agholor. He's been inside the division. He knows what this division is about. And then another name that I'll throw out there is DJ Chark. Played for the Panthers and Chargers last year, made some nice plays. He's still a big body. He ran in the 4.3s coming out, so he's still got a little bit of speed. He fits that mold of an ex-wide receiver if DK Metcalf goes down. He was brought into Atlanta this training camp, and he got cut early, so maybe he is just officially cooked. But he's certainly somebody to keep your eye on as a big body ex-wide receiver type. So before we get into the waiver wire players for you guys to keep your eye on here, some guys that may get cut that the Steelers should be monitoring here, click that thumbs up icon if you want the Pittsburgh Steelers to add a wide receiver before the start of the 2025 regular season. All right, so now let's get into the waiver wire targets. And a lot of these guys we have not talked about on this channel before, so some new kind of meat here to kind of enjoy here. So we'll go to Mitchell Tinsley with the Cincinnati Bengals. Had a phenomenal performance on Monday Night Football versus the Washington Commanders this past week. And, I think that there's a pretty good chance he ends up making the final roster for Cincinnati. But if he doesn't, I think the Steelers need to pounce, all right? He had a couple of really nice catches against the Commanders back-to-back, some touchdown receptions. I think he got over 5 catches in the game. He's somebody that has good hands, good body control. He's a pretty good route runner. He reminds me a lot of Kendrick Bourne when he was younger. Kendrick Bourne was a legitimate, third starter piece in this league for a very, very long time. So I think Tinsley's somebody that I would be interested in if he gets waived. I think a lot of teams would be interested in him, though, if he gets waived. So, definitely somebody the Steelers should be interested in if he's available. Then somebody that I think is maybe a little bit more gettable, but I think would be a really good fit as that number 4 receiver type for this team is Tim Patrick. Patrick was somebody that was a waiver wire guy last year that I wanted the Steelers to go get, and he actually played pretty decently for the Detroit Lions last year. He was a legitimate starter for them after tearing both his ACL and his Achilles in back-to-back seasons with Denver back in 2022 and 2023. And after the Broncos brought in Josh Reynolds last year, there just wasn't a whole lot of room for Patrick on that final roster in Denver. He ends up going to the Detroit Lions, and he had a pretty darn good season at age 31. He's known as a really high-end run blocker, so that would certainly fit what the Steelers would want in an ex-receiver, a backup as the wide receiver 4 option, kind of in that same vein as Gabe Davis. Now, he's not a downfield threat like Davis is. He's more of a possession type of receiver, so different type of bigger receiver here, but both of those guys are high-end run blockers and can theoretically play X if DK Metcalf went down. I compared Mitchell Tinsley to Kendrick Bourne. Looks like Bourne is probably going to get cut by the New England Patriots. And Bourne is somebody that's getting older, but he's still, solid, and he would be okay as a number 4 wide receiver. He would be uninspiring veteran depth that's on the decline of his NFL career. Honestly, I'd put him in the same category as like Robert Woods, so take that for what you will. Bourne's not my favorite target, but he's played in a lot of systems very similar to Arthur Smith's. He's been asked to be a run blocker before. He's over 200 pounds, so he's got the size to do that. But yeah, there's definitely guys on this list I'd rather have than Kendrick Bourne. Then somebody that intrigues me here, guys, is UDFA receiver out of Colorado, Will Sheppard. Played with Shadur Sanders there with the Colorado Buffaloes last year. When I watched every single snap of Shadur Sanders' film from this past year because I was lower on him and I wanted to make abundantly clear and sure that I was that low on Shadur Sanders. And I was, by the way. And, take a little shot here at the Browns. It seems like I was right about that. But Will Sheppard was one of these guys that was bailing out Shadur on a lot of kind of downfield, kind of 50-50 ball type of situations. And I'm a little surprised he didn't get drafted. And as we know, that Green Bay Packers wide receiver room is pretty freaking tight as it is right now. There's a lot of talent in there, not enough spots, and I think Sheppard is going to be the odd man out, but he's got a big body. If you want somebody that can make tough catches down the sideline and over the middle, somebody with a big catch radius and good hands, I think that Sheppard might be an interesting guy to bring in here as a developmental piece, as a backup X-wide receiver, and I would definitely keep my eye out for Will Sheppard if he ends up getting cut. And then the final name that I'll throw out there, because I've been seeing it a lot on Steelers Twitter, and it is a bigger name, Curtis Samuel. There's just not a great fit. I didn't love the signing for Buffalo to bring him in the first place. They had Khalil Shakir, who was their slot receiver, and he was already excellent, and they tried putting Samuel on the outside there in Buffalo last year, and he just wasn't very good out there. He is a slot-only weapon, in my opinion. That's more of a gadget piece. He doesn't have the best hands in the world. He's not the best against press, so he can't really play outside. He's good enough in the slot, and then you can put him in the backfield. He's a manufactured touch guy. But the Steelers already have their manufactured touch guy in Jonnu Smith. They're going to give him a lot of opportunities on those screens and stuff like that. They'll also give a lot of those manufactured touches to DK Metcalf and even Calvin Austin III with his speed. So I'm not sure how much they really need a gadget type of wide receiver here in Pittsburgh. Also, if you get Samuel, I don't think he addresses the biggest issue with the Steelers' wide receiver room, which, as we talked about, was somebody that can go in and play X wide receiver if DK Metcalf goes down with an injury. As discussed, I don't think Samuel can play X. I think he's a true slot, and right now I think we have too many slot receivers here in Pittsburgh. Scotty Miller, Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson can all play in the slot perfectly fine, so I'm just not sure if I see the fit between Curtis Samuel and the Pittsburgh Steelers. So predict it for me down there in the comment section. Will the Pittsburgh Steelers add a wide receiver before the start of the season? And if so, which one do you think they bring in? Do you think they sign Gabe Davis? Do you think they sign Odell Beckham Jr.? Do you think they trade for somebody like a Jauan Jennings? Let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. I think there's a lot of interesting possibilities out there. And whenever Omar Khan pulls the trigger, we'll be having a breaking news video for you guys right here on Steelers Talk. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. We got a bunch of great content coming your way this week. Ponzi and I will be going live on Steelers Talk Live later this afternoon, starting at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be talking about roster cuts, latest news and rumors surrounding the Pittsburgh Steelers, some injury updates, all that great stuff, guys. So make sure you click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Till next time, guys, here we go, Steelers.